Reichstag fire, and the Republicans want to exploit the LA fire. Mass deportation meets mass stupidity as Trump already pre-fails again. And I wonder if Elon Musk understands that MAGA now plans to kill him and eat him. MAGA in disarray. Well, the mass deportation scheme becomes the latest casualty of having elected a bunch of incompetent egomaniacs, the only things they are hands-on about being their own dicks. Steve Bannon has declared war on Elon Musk and on Elon Musk's toady David Sachs and on Peter Thiel. The point isn't whether Bannon still has a tenth of the sway he used to have among the fascists. The point is his less than a tenth of these slime is the angry, violent tenth. And Bannon has escalated his war on Musk over those H1B visas. Bannon doesn't just want Musk exiled from the White House because Bannon and the rest of the nativist lunatics hate all foreigners, and Musk wants to not hate foreigners who can make him more rich. Bannon now wants Musk and the others to be the first immigrants thrown out of the country. He actually told this to Italy's most read newspaper, Corriere della Sala, which is not one of the newspapers Mussolini owned, but it did give out the Mussolini Prize, and all this must have been Bannon's entry to the judges in the Mussolini Prize. I am quoting, believe it or not, Breitbart's coverage of this. Well, because, the New York Times headline would have been, Bannon praises minorities. Steve Bannon, I will do anything to keep Elon Musk out of the White House. Rome. Former Breitbart News executive chairman Steve Bannon has declared war on Elon Musk, vowing to have the tech billionaire kicked out of the White House by the time Trump is inaugurated. Quote, I will have Elon Musk run out of here by Inauguration Day. He will not have a blue pass to the White House. He will not have full access to the White House. He will be like any other person. He is a truly evil guy, a very bad guy. I made it my personal thing to take this guy down. Before, because he put money in, I was prepared to tolerate it. I am not prepared to tolerate it anymore. Wait, there's more. This thing of the H1B visas, it's about the entire immigration system is gamed by the tech overlords. They use it to their advantage. The people are furious. 76% of engineers working in Silicon Valley are non-Americans. No blacks or Hispanics have any of these jobs or any access to these jobs. Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Elon Musk are all white South Africans. He should go back to South Africa. Why do we have South Africans, the most racist people on earth, white South Africans? We have them making any comments at all on what goes on in the United States? Unquote. So trouble in MAGA paradise. Well, it's MAGA, so trouble in MAGA hell. It does not matter whether or not Bannon succeeds in kneecapping Musk. It's that he tries and that we help. Because a week before the inauguration and the entirety of the machinery of the rage fire that fuels MAGA, hatred of immigrants, especially of Hispanics, but anybody will do. Look, Bannon just hit South Africans. The entirety of that machinery has already broken down repeatedly. First, it was the blowback against Musk and those specialty visas and remarks by Vivek Ramaswamy, nitwit. Now, CNN reports that the border czar, this cartoon villain Tom Homan, has warned Republican lawmakers that, the initial deportation plan is not going to be like 15 million people or whatever it is Trump said. And it's not going to be 2 million. It's not going to be 1 million. It's going to be more like the way we did math in my day. It's going to be more like 60,000 people. You heard me. Highlights of a sourced story from CNN. Quote, Homan has privately told Republican lawmakers to temper their expectations for the incoming administration's initial deportation operation, citing limited resources. According to multiple sources involved in the conversations, quote, we are not having a discussion about 20 million deportations. We are having a discussion about an order and priority and expectation, GOP Rep. Darrell Issa, who was in one of the meetings with Homan, said. Quote, Holman has been telling some of the members that, hey, if you want me to do all these things that you're talking about, this costs money. And it's not being done with the CR, continuing resolution, that's in place now, one GOP lawmaker told CNN. Now, here is the math part. Quoting again, Holman said he would need a minimum of 100,000 beds to detain undocumented immigrants. That would be in the prison camps, more than doubling the 40,000 detention beds ICE is currently funded for, and it would require more ICE agents. The agency has around 6,000 immigration enforcement officers. Quote, it all depends on the funding I get from the Hill, Holman said. So, the increase in deportation from Biden levels, which the MAGA madmen think is at least 2 million immediately, before Trump finishes his speech next Monday. It, in fact, would be 100,000 minus 40,000. That's 60,000. That's 60,000 beds in the concentration camps. Now, depending on turnover, in 10 weeks, that could be 600,000 people moved in and out. Could be, if deportations actually did anything more than ruin lives and spread fear and violence and destroy our economy and drive up the price of everything. If there was not a reasonable chance that, just like last time, they're not actually going to deport nearly anybody more than the average. Because the point of the deportations is just to scare people about foreigners. You can't deport all the people who may or may not be here legally. They take all the cheap, crappy jobs, like sending food to all the rich Republicans. Maybe also the deportations were the fascists we met along the way. This funding that Tom Homan wants is supposed to take place as DOGE cuts $2 trillion in waste. Oh, no, it's now down to $1 trillion. Maybe. If Steve Bannon doesn't kill and eat Elon Musk. Musk has already dropped the number. He can only find $1 trillion to cut. He can't find his ass with both hands. So a week before the administration starts, a week before they even take office, and the Trump junta has already failed at day one mass roundup deportations. They've already failed and infuriated the fascists who voted with all three fingers to end legal immigration because Musk wants those H1Bs, because Ramaswamy called natives dumb and lazy, and now Bannon has targeted Musk. The Trump junta has already confessed there is no way to unilaterally lower grocery prices, instantly or even non-instantly. The universal tariffs aren't happening anytime soon. He's not going to dig up the Panama Canal and move it to Mar-a-Lago on Inauguration Day. He ain't buying Greenland and coercing Canada. And guess what? He didn't settle Russia's war on Ukraine in 24 hours before he even took office. And he won't be able to do it after he does. And what are Democrats doing with this all-you-can-eat buffet of Trump pre-failures? Nothing. And that's as big a problem as anything else. You and I may want an America in which we don't do to Republicans what they do to Democrats. Too bad for us. Our society, especially our media, is now like the Soviet Union in the 1960s. When everything that happened bad in America, from a delayed space launch to the 1965 Northeast blackout, was declared by the Russian propaganda office TASS to be the fault of decadent capitalism. 40 years ago, the Republicans perfected a very simple formula, an American version of TASS. Whatever happens, claim credit for it or blame the Democrats for it, or both. Fill in the details later. Somebody will think of something. And we have to play the same stupid game. Especially since Republican failures are so plentiful, Republican brains are so rare, and usually it really is their fault. No backfilling imagination required. I don't mean do it 100% of the time. MAGA and the GOP really are selling the idea that the Southern California fire disasters don't indicate in the slightest the burgeoning atmospheric catastrophe, but instead are all Gavin Newsom's fault. More on this in a moment. But why aren't Democrats blaming the wildfires on Trump's first presidency and the undermining of forestry services and national park lands and environmental protections? Is it true? In part, it is true. Does it matter? No, it doesn't. The formula is simple. A, something happens. B, blame Trump for it. C, figure out exactly why later. D, if any of it sticks, figure out more reasons why it's his fault. As Brian Beutler writes on his site, quote, first, do not help Republicans. Not in any way. On any issue. Republicans can't pass a budget or raise the debt ceiling. Tough luck. Do not provide them any bailout votes on any issue. Period. The end. Second, make Donald Trump own every bad outcome that happens anywhere in the world while paying special attention to areas where Republicans are particularly vulnerable, like housing and Ukraine. For starters, Trump has set up impossible expectations. He promised to end the war in 24 hours. Starting on January 22nd, Democrats should ask every day why the war is still ongoing. Unquote. Gabby Beutler is right. And then there's the easy stuff. J.D. Vance has announced he is attending college football's national championship game in New Orleans a week from today. Wait, a week from today? A week from today? Why, that's a week from today. Isn't that a week from today? Isn't that the inauguration? I mean, the game is at night, but he still will be sworn in and then leave Washington immediately to go watch an effing football game. What would the Republicans have done with a Vice President Tim Walz if he did that? They would have beaten him up nonstop starting an hour from now and ending never. Get to work. Who's paying your salary, Vice President Walz? Instead, Vance gets to preempt the criticism by going to hyperbole. Quote, hopefully everyone is cool with me skipping the inauguration, Beardo wrote, so I can go to the national title game. Ha ha ha, so witty. But seriously, what would the Republicans have done with that? Tim Walz is so irresponsible, he's not only making you pay his salary while he goes to watch a football game, he's mocking you for criticizing government waste. J.D. Vance should be known from next Monday through the end of his life as the vice president who on the day of his inauguration went to a goddamned college football game. This should be repeated so often that people who live and die for college football should be ashamed of J.D. Vance for doing this. Who is saying any of this? I like the sound of my own voice, too. I'm not sufficient in this. J.D. Vance is leaving as his first act as vice president, Washington, to go sit in the stands and wave a little banner that says Ohio State. It is our one chance of survival. They are all that stupid. Tulsi Gabbard. Her nomination as Director of National Lack of Personal Intelligence was foundering because, firstly, she is an idiot. Secondly, because all the Republican intel hawks, like Senator James Lankford, were dismayed by her previous doubts about Section 702 of the FISA Act. That is the section that lets us eavesdrop on non-Americans outside the country, even if they happen to be talking Americans in the country, like, just to pick a name at random, Trump. 8 years ago, Section 702 was the end times among MAGA. Now, Lankford and other Republicans are willing to throw Tulsi Gabbard under the bus, which could do no damage to her, especially if it hit her hair, over Section 702. Mandatory support of 702. Tulsi no like. Lankford and the others, none too subtly, told her, skunk-hairedness, to get with the program or not get confirmed, and Friday she endorsed Section 702, and Lankford then endorsed her. She's going to be Director of National Intelligence. And a totally poor advertisement for her own department. As to Pete Hegseth's nomination, I don't know. A lot of play was given to the story that he was in trouble because the FBI was interviewing everybody he ever met, but we want that. That's what the FBI didn't do with Drunky Kavanaugh. I don't think the interviews mean anything Unless, of course, the FBI finds something, anything, any of the 100 things the rumor mills contend and continue to contend he might have done. Now to the Republicans and the increasingly evident truth that the MAGA fascists are trying to take the disaster in Southern California and build it into a new template for conditioning government disaster relief on political compliance. Exploiting a fire. Where have we seen that before? And no, I don't think the Republicans set the LA fires. But I do always shudder at the memory of the 1982 Boston arson nightmare in which 3 cops, 2 firemen, and some of their friends set at least 163 fires in Boston and environs in hopes of preventing cuts to the police and fire departments. Don't say it's impossible, because it happened back in the good old days. I also shuddered the other day when I saw a climate change expert on the BBC explaining that such an obvious and catastrophic disaster as this continuing hell on Earth, which may well continue through the end of this month, always awakens the doubters in a nation to the reality of atmospheric crisis and climate change. And I thought, you poor bastard, you don't realize it. But what? 3 out of every 10 Americans, maybe 4, maybe 5, have already been hypnotized by the Republicans and the media into thinking that Southern California burned because it became too woke. The Republicans, including that idiot who a week from today will be vice president of the United States, are making up, fabricating, misleading, lying, and lying, blaming a literal firestorm like the ones in Dresden in World War II on the Democrats. And their cult members are happy to believe, because the idea is just as stupid as they are. And it boils over with the confirmation bias that is their mother's milk. And it allows them to continue to live in denial of the fact that someday soon a metropolitan area in a red state will be erased by a natural disaster, even after Trump sinks into Moses-like hallucinations and holds up his hand and claims he can stop that tornado or that hurricane or those floods, simply by using the force of his superior mind and a Bible. A Trump brand Bible, obviously. Vance, who really is just a urine specimen jar with a beard, and both of them full, quote, "Some of these reservoirs have been dry for 15, 20 years. The fire hydrants are being reported as going dry while the firefighters are trying to put out the fires. There was a serious lack of competent governance in California. It's part of the reason why these fires have gotten so bad." No, it isn't, asshole. A complete lie. Utter, unmoored, uncaring. If it were under oath, Vance would be going to prison for perjury. Lie. Stick to trying to successfully navigate going to a football game, you moron. Reality is too difficult for you to deal with, J.V. Vance. And then there's Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who is as phony as his jet black hair when he is just 7 months younger than I am, whose biggest accomplishment in public service to date has to be to bring a soccer team to Nashville. Bill Hagerty yesterday. The failure of leadership in California that's been egregious, whether it's Gavin Newsom prioritizing a fish over his citizens, or a leader like Karen Bass who prioritizes DEI initiatives over the readiness of first responders. It's pathetic what's happened here. None of that happened, Grecian Formula Boy, but go on. Tell me more about your area of expertise, being pathetic. Before we put funds into place, we've got to find out exactly how we're going to hold these leaders accountable and what sort of policy changes are required. There it is. There's the Reichstag fire-style exploitation I referenced earlier. You and I, being human beings, we see Southern California and viscerally feel the pain and loss and fear, as certainly as if it were bad weather going through trailer parks somewhere. The MAGA robo-humans see only opportunity. Trump merely dipped his toe in these waters last time. More correctly, had somebody do it for him. He can't really move his toes on his own. But this is a preview from Senator Hagerty. Hold the leaders accountable and policy changes required. Those are fascist speak cliches for use public anger and panic to attempt to prosecute Democrats when disasters unfold and to demand political fealty to Trump and the Republicans before aid is given by the government. Now, this will lead us down a path where eventually the resistance will have to cut off blue state funds to the federal regime, whether that's done by the states themselves or in a taxpayer's strike, I don't know. We will get there. It is now inevitable. If they actually try to hold back funds in California, California will simply respond in kind. It is unavoidable. I don't know if it'll take a year to get to this point or it'll take 100 years, but this is the route by which the United States of America dissolves. Not a civil war, not violence, simply the states that have money and resources saying, we're not carrying you assholes anymore. But before that happens, here's more Hagerty and more somewhat comforting Republican incompetence. Quote, when Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk take a hard look at how we effectively deploy resources here, we're going to have to see some very real changes. Elon? Elon who? Poor Hagerty is not in the inner party. He does not know of Bannon's plan to make Musk the first immigrant to be deported. But he does inadvertently raise a philosophical and moral questions, not that the Hagertys of this world think about those questions anymore. But it is simply this. If you were Elon Musk, worth $416 billion and rising, what would you do with this choice? You could spend $44 billion to buy Twitter, never get any of that money back, by the way, and start a labyrinthine, heavy lift, all work, no fund, bad Bond movie plot to gain more power and more money. For some reason, you need more money, as if $416 billion can't buy you all the ketamine in the world. You could spend $44 billion on that, or you could spend $44 billion and personally give $50,000 to 880,000 different people in Southern California to help them rebuild their lives. And oh, by the way, to buy yourself unassailable goodwill and even worship for all time. Those are your choices. Why would you do the labyrinthine, heavy lift, bad Bond movie plot instead of the charity? Which, if you had $416 billion, would you choose? The correct answer, of course, is both, because $328 billion would still be the most in the world. And in fact, you could throw another $100 billion into the ocean of GoFundMes in Southern California, and your wallet would never, ever know the difference. As I've already referenced, we are living in the gotcha times, the whining times. Never mind solving a problem or putting out a fire. Exploit the problem and point at the fire and tell the morons who is to blame for the fire. And this is being exacerbated by the accelerating media crisis. You have a fire in L.A., you got a fire at the New York Times. Did the Times merge with the Onion and not tell anybody? I'll just quote this piece by a man named Santul Nurkar, which was apparently intended as media criticism, but wound up unintentionally becoming the New York Times criticizing the New York Times. Quote, how outlets on the left and right have covered the Los Angeles wildfires. Media outlets reported similarly on the destruction caused by the fires that raced through Southern California, but partisan publications attributed them to very different causes. So it's partisan publications. We're going to have Democratic underground here, right? As deadly wildfires raged across Southern California this week, conservative and liberal media outlets reported similarly on the level of devastation, but found vastly different culprits for it. Right-wing outlets blamed much of the devastation on Democrats. They assailed the political leadership of California, which is heavily Democratic. They also blamed the destruction on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives undertaken in Los Angeles. Liberal outlets criticized President-elect Donald J. Trump's reaction to the fires, which they described as insensitive. Some attributed the intensity of the fires to climate change. Where did they get such a stupid idea as that? Back to the Times piece. Breitbart, the conservative website, ran more than a half dozen headlines on its homepage that criticized Mayor Bass on Thursday, including one that referred to her as missing in action in Africa while her city burned. Another claimed she knew of the fire risk before leaving for Ghana. The left-wing news sites are MSNBC and Salon. Those are the ones the New York Times cites. Salon? Salon is still there? Salon owes me money from columns from 2003. They're still in business. Call me. You owe me money. You owe me money. But their equivalents in the arrogance bubble in which the New York Times exists, MSNBC and Salon, their parallels through the looking glass are the Daily Wire and Breitbart. The Daily Wire and Breitbart are fascist propaganda sites. I mean, New York Times, you couldn't get Russian RT and North Korea Nightly News in there instead? Or at least work in something about Mark Zuckerberg as the new leading right-wing propagandist. Turns out, before he turned Meta into MAGA, he went to Mar-a-Lago to pledge fealty in person. From Semaphore News, Meta CEO Zuckerberg met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Friday. A source familiar with their encounter confirmed to Semaphore. He'd been spotted earlier at Trump's Florida compound, and the person familiar with the meeting and a Trump aide both declined to detail its contents. The visit comes just days after Zuckerberg announced sweeping changes at the company that ended two irritants to Trump and his supporters: fact-checking programs and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The new Meta policy also relaxes restrictions on speech. Zuckerberg said in a video announcing the shift that the changes came amid too many mistakes and too much censorship and too much time at the hair salon. Then Zuckerberg went on with Joe Rogan, the artist formerly known as Uncle Fester, and lamented the rise of culturally neutered companies that have sought to distance themselves from masculine energy, adding that it's good if a culture celebrates the aggression a bit more. No, it's the same Mark Zuckerberg talking about masculinity.
I think it's another to basically say that masculinity is bad. And I just think we kind of swung culturally to that part of the kind of the spectrum where, you know, it's all like, okay, masculinity is toxic. We have to like get rid of it completely. It's like, no, like it's both of these things are good, right? It's like you want like feminine energy, you want masculine energy. Like I think that's like you're going to have parts of society that have more of one or the other. I think that's all good. But I do think the corporate culture sort of had swung towards being this somewhat more neutered thing.
So it's Zuckerberg going on Joe Uncle Fester Rogan and talking masculinity and aggression. And by the way, the word you wanted there was aggressiveness. Aggression is, usually violence. And Zuckerberg going on there wearing his new perm that looks like the one used by the Roman Emperor Caligula. Think ringlets, 1977 ringlets. Oh, and on top of that, there was something else I can't quite convey. I hadn't been able to pin it down until just now when I watched the video of that clip again. Elizabeth Holmes. The Theranos con woman with the fake voice. The fake voice. The fake voice. And the dead eyes. And Mark Zuckerberg with the fake voice and the dead eyes. Have we ever seen them in the same place at the same time? The role of Mark Zuckerberg will now be played by Elizabeth Holmes. Also of interest here, are we in hell because of this reason? The formerly married couple, David Shipley and Naomi Wolf. He's at the Washington Post, forcing out prize-winning political cartoonists and boasting about it now. She's online insisting the planes spreading the fire suppressant over the fires aren't spreading fire suppressant, they're spreading... I can't tell you. But you won't believe it. Now that's a tease. And that's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on Countdown, Southern California is ablaze and apparently will remain so. Compulsive liars will be sworn in to run the country into the ground in 1 week. There is not one rebel leader, or at least not one rebel leader who said anything of note in the last 2 months, except John Fetterman, who's gone over to the other side and thus desperately needs a stroke recheck. But I'm still going to make you smile with 2 words. Soccer breakdown. Ahead in Things I Promise Not to Tell. If you've never heard it, please enjoy. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. The bronze worst Joe Scarborough. Good God. Has no one sent him the clippings from the newspapers, or any of the editorial blowback, or any of the responses from his viewers and his regular guests? Joe Scarborough has now doubled down on the founding of MSNBC. He had an argument on the air with Michael Steele, in which Michael Steele made sense. In fact, made all the sense in the argument. Scarborough went on the air and said that Obama's handshake with Trump and their lighthearted conversation was not the end of the world at the Carter funeral. And no, it was not the end of the world. It was something Obama should never have done under any circumstances, because Trump is the blight on mankind who may erase all records of the Obama presidency when the world ends because of the crap Trump does. But it's not the end of the world at the moment. So he got into an argument, Scarborough did, sort of defending Obama against Michael Steele, who raised again the point of Scarborough and Mrs. Scarborough, this Mrs. Scarborough, heading to Mar-a-Lago and once again switching sides for the sixth time on the issue of Trump, going there and pledging fealty to the monster. Michael Steele said, why do we have to be civil to Trump? And then Scarborough denied somehow that he'd ever said we had to be civil, when of course he said we had to open up a dialogue and we had to talk about, not just talk about Trump, but talk to Trump. Scarborough is still rationalizing this. Ordinarily, I would look at this scenario, and knowing Joe Scarborough, I would assume he's being blackmailed. But Joe doesn't need to be blackmailed to perform services like this for fascists. He's done it his whole life. What he sees is which way the wind is blowing. And hopefully, it's blowing him right off the roof. Runners up, Politico. This headline, along with an extraordinary picture of one firefighter trying to put out the blazes in California, seemingly all by himself. There's a bunch of palm trees on the left. There's a house. It is bright red inside the windows on the second floor above the garage. and there is one man holding a fire hose. And the graphic over this picture, Trump, mush, unleash on California Democrats over wildfires. Mush. You know, Elon mush. They deleted this picture and changed it on their website. Elon mush. Why'd they delete it? But our winner, Naomi Wolf. Funny, I invoked her ex-husband David Shipley last week. He is the opinion editor of the newly merged Washington Post and Penny Saver. He's the one who killed the Ann Telnays cartoon on Bezos kissing Trump's ass because it was repetitive, even though George Will has been writing the exact same opinion column in the Washington Post week after week since roughly April 1974. And then Ann Telnays, one of the many people at the Washington Post who quit without another job lined up, quit. Well, here is that guy's ex-wife. Naomi Wolf was, among other things, an advisor on Al Gore's presidential campaign. And once again, we find out these clues a quarter century later as to how, in part, we started on this path to this effing disaster, this America of 2025. And one of the clues was Naomi Wolf was an advisor on Al Gore's presidential campaign. She reportedly handled political issues and feminist issues and how Gore dressed. Sometime I will tell you about his other advisor, who became his business partner, who was the man who actually hired me and gave me all the money to go to Current TV. And his was the advice that throughout the 2000 campaign, Al Gore needed to stay away from Bill Clinton, who was the most popular Democratic president since FDR. Anyway, back to Naomi Wolf. The last quarter century has not been kind to her. Her Twitter handle is now Dr. Naomi Wolf, 8 New York Times bestsellers. I wouldn't even do that. She has chimed in her new way of finding something crazy that no one is being crazy about elsewhere with this. Are your friends in LA not reacting to danger in an expected way? Are they almost in a trance? Multiple confirmations independently that suggest this is the case, including from a therapist who says her patients are not reacting normally. Well, that's it. Naomi Wolf knows a therapist who says this is true, therefore it is true. Multiple confirmations that the entire Los Angeles and Southern California community is not reacting normally to danger. This leads her, even though it's not true, to something even more not true. Could a mood stabilizer of some kind be in what was sprayed? Or do weather manipulation waves entrain human thought patterns in some way? We are there in history and must ask the questions. Spoiler alert, we are not there in history. You, Naomi Wolf, you are there in history. And matter of fact, what you are in is not history. It's just you in a hallucination. There are no weather manipulation waves, and there is no mood stabilizer being sprayed during a disaster in which a fire is consuming the nation's second largest city. Yeah, the LA fires were made just as an excuse to spray clouds of mood-stabilizing drugs. Something that, isn't. The LA fires were set so that you could spray large quantities. Who knows how much this would require if there were such a thing? To spray them all over Southern California? Instead of, if somebody were to do this, and presumably this would be Democrats who were doing this, well, you would have a choice of spraying it over Southern California or over MAGA land to make people comply or mood stabilize, or you're using your space lasers on them, Marjorie Taylor Naomi Wolf. Here's the point. If these things exist, and let me just quote them exactly again. a mood stabilizer of some kind in what was sprayed, or weather manipulation waves designed to entrain human thought patterns. We are there in history and must ask the question. Here in history, I have this question. Why not just save all this crap and spray them all over Naomi Wolf, whose mood has not been stable this entire century and who is today's worst person in the world? Mood stabilizing. To the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me and things I promised not to tell. You may enjoy this one enough to keep a copy. Soccer breakdown. Gary Miller was one of the backbones of SportsCenter. I had worked with him at CNN. He was strong, competent, very loud, forceful. He hated mascots, and he had no filter. He and Dan Patrick were great friends in Atlanta, and then Gary and Dan left for ESPN within months of each other, 1989, 1990. This has been said of me, and so I say it of Gary with affection. He suffered no fools gladly. And though his elbows were always up, he made sure that 99% of the time when they bumped into somebody, that somebody had well deserved it. As near as I can piece together, Gary was doing the 11 p.m. SportsCenter on Friday night, June 24th, 1994. Typically, Dan and I did the 11 Sunday through Thursday. The story of soccer's 1994 World Cup, at least in the first week, was a preponderance of player ejections, red cards handed them by the referee. In those days, the 11 p.m. SportsCenter included a feature 2 or 3 minutes long on a story that had drummed up a lot of interest during the first show planning meeting around 3:30 p.m. It was a feature called Breakdown. It provided long-form analysis in the days when we didn't have a lot of that. Could be a coach getting fired, could be the relative credentials of Baseball Hall of Fame candidates, could be one fantastic play in a game. Once we did a deadpan serious breakdown about injuries to mascots. A producer or the anchor himself would write the script, they would pre-record the narration, and then the producer would edit it. This is pre-digital, it was done tape to tape. It could take hours to edit it. And the key was to track it, to record that narration, which was done in a tiny wood-paneled room reeking of mildew that looked and smelled exactly like every suburban basement rec room in America circa October 1965. That's where Gary Miller found himself on the night of Friday, June 24th, 1994, reading a script about soccer players from around the world, none of whose names he had ever seen before, let alone tried to pronounce. It was the soccer breakdown in all senses of the word. The raw tape, the original version of his tracking session for the script for Soccer Breakdown, is easily the most beloved bootleg in ESPN's history. In fact, it is so popular that there are several different cuts of this bootleg. People have sat down with the original tape, which runs nearly 20 minutes, and edited it down to only the best or worst parts. Now, I'm not going to say I have a copy of the original. I'm simply going to note that Dan Patrick ran it on his radio show in 2017 and posted the whole segment to YouTube. So, yeah, that's where I got my copy of it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm going to annotate for you what happened. So let me present this to you in 3 segments. It did not start well for Gary, and it got worse from there. Although Mr. Miller gave it its eternal title and life by going sibilant on the S for the word soccer. I'll note only one thing, the acronym of International Soccer's outfit, FIFA. Gary, it's pronounced FIFA.
Soccer breakdown in 3, 2, 1. FIFA, soccer's governing body. 3, 2, 1. FIFA, soccer's 3, 2, 1. The red card has become the calling card for this year's tournament. 7 ejections for 3, 2, 1. Witness Romania's Ian Bladu against the Swiss. Is or true? Christ.
But that was the easy part. Now, in the script came the names of the World Cup stars who had been given red card ejections in the first week of the tournament. One was the 17-year-old star of the Cameroon team, Rigobert Song, often referred to by his full name, Rigobert Song Bahanog, or as it was said in the script, Rigobert Bahanog Song.
3, 2, 1. Cameroon's Rigobert Bannon. 3, 2, 1. Cameroon's Rigobert Bayangang Zang Za Da Da Bayanyang Song. 3, 2, 1. Cameroon's Rigobert Banyang Zong. Bayanyang Song. 3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. By the way, Rigobert Song is now the manager of the Cameroon team. He's gone from being the youngest player in the World Cup history to get a red card to running his nation's team. I'll interject here that at the start of this final major clip, Gary Miller says to somebody who has clearly entered that tracking room that smelled of mildew, "Get out of here." Dan Patrick said that was him. I think he's mistaken. It doesn't matter much, but there was no reason for Dan to have been there on a Friday night, especially if we were not doing the show. And also, there has never been a microphone, ever, that Dan has not spoken into. Anyway, we have already met Rigobert Bahanog Song. Now meet my guy, the Italian goalie, Gianluca Pagliuca.
2. Get out of here. 2 is guilt through. 2. How long is this tape? 3, 2, 1. 1. Cameroon's Rigobert Banyan Song prevented a breakaway from Brazil's Babeto. Oh, God almighty, I hate soccer! Cameroon's Rigobert Banyan Young Song. I better try that one last time. 2, 1. Cameroon's Rigobert Banyan Yong Song. Oh, I hate this! Chalk up Bolivia's Luis Cristaldo for both on 3, 2, 1. But the most notable red card of the tournament came when Italian goaltender Gianluca Pagliuca, the mother, 3, 2, 1. But the flurry of red cards thus far has taught coaches and players alike to control their play if they'd like to control their fate in this tournament. Holy bleep! That is all.
The pronunciation of Rigobert Song's name is one thing. I was delighted by how furious Gary got at Gianluca Pagliuca of the Italian team and the expletive he used to describe him, which you may have just heard. In the days that followed, in fact, the Italian goalie's name became shorthand for me for that expletive in question. So for the next 3 years on SportsCenter, and after that on Fox Sports News, and then on my ESPN2 show, and on Football Night in America, and then when I returned to SportsCenter in 2018, if you heard me say Gianluca Pagliuca while we were showing a player making an error or arguing with an umpire or official, I was actually implying that the player had just said Gianluca Pagliuca. There's another punchline to this story, of course. The idea to do this soccer breakdown that so bedeviled Gary Miller, the story of red cards in the first week of the 1994 World Cup, the idea to do that came from Gary Miller. Never volunteer. I've never been convinced that Gary was really happy about his immortality, certainly not in the way my ESPN pal Steve Levy not so secretly glories in the day he once tried to say that a New England Patriots player had a bulging disc, but didn't quite get disc right. But Gary Miller has been a good sport about this through the end of his ESPN career in 2004 and afterwards in his days at Channel 2 and Channel 9 in Los Angeles and most recently at Channel 2 in Cincinnati. It isn't hard to understand why this tape is so famous and the pleasure derived from it so enduring. As John Cleese once said about the real-life hotel manager on whom he based his character from Fawlty Towers, he had this wonderful bad temper. But there are two more things. One, this occurred exactly a week to the day after the O.J. Simpson car chase, and people forget now just how disturbing that was in an America, especially sports America, like at ESPN, that with the exception of a few of us who knew, nobody knew how rotten a human being O.J. Simpson was. So even a week later, we all needed this laugh, and Gary gave it to us. And even larger, the essence of soccer in every country in which it is played is that it always allows and encourages and even demands that its fans complain about it. And so, while we cherish Soccer Breakdown and 3, 2, 1 and Rigobert Bahanang Song and Bebeto and Gianluca Pagliuca, to me, it is really about 5 words that anybody who hates the game will say, but they're also 5 words that any fan of the sport will certainly use at some point in his life. Possibly at some point today. And they are the 5 words with which I will leave you for now.
Oh, God almighty, I hate soccer!
Since I first told you this story, I have, as I mentioned, rediscovered an artifact that I thought was gone forever. Right after the Soccer Breakdown saga unfolded, an ESPN colleague made me a copy of the original raw tape of Gary, and we put it on a cassette, and I couldn't find it. There were things on it that were somehow lost from all subsequent copies of Soccer Breakdown. So this is not as high def, but I think it's even more high comedy.
Soccer Breakdown in 3, 2, 1. After a 1990 World Cup marked by physical play and low scores, FIFA Soccer's 3, 2, 1. After a 1990 World Cup marked by 3, 2, 1. After a 1990 World Cup marked by physical play and low scores, FIFA, soccer's governing body, sent out a decree for the 1994 Cup to be better policed. The result? The red card has become the calling card for this year's tournament. 7 ejections for 3, 2, 1. After a 1990 World Cup marked by physical play and low scores, FIFA, soccer's governing body, sent out the decree for the 1994 Cup to be better policed. The result? The red card has become the calling card for this year's tournament. 7 ejections through the first 23 matches, and a direct message that rough play will not be tolerated, and more teams will be playing a man down if it continues. The goal? More goals, and a more palatable sell to the American public. 3, 2, 1. The results? Just over 2.5 goals a contest, compared to 2.2 per game at the 1990 Cup in Italy. Why does the red card come out? A FIFA rulebook states a player shall be sent off the field of play and shown the red card if, in the opinion of the referee, he, 1, is guilty of violent conduct, witness Romania's Ian Bladiu against the Swiss, or 3, 2, 1. Why does the red card come out? The FIFA rulebook states a player should be sent off the field of play and shown the red card if, in the opinion of the referee, he, 1, is guilty of violent conduct, witness Romania's Ian Bladiu against the Swiss, 2, is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Bahanang Song prevented a breakaway from Bebeto. 3, 2, 1. 2, is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Bahanang Song. 3, 2, 1. 2, is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Bahanang Song. Bahanang Song. 3, 2, 1. 2, get out of here. 2 is guilty. Through it. 2. How long is this tape? 2 is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Bahanang Song prevented a breakaway from Brazil's Bebeto. God almighty, I hate soccer! 2 is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Bahanang Song prevented a breakaway from Brazil's Bebeto. A play both serious and foul, deserving of a red card. I better try that one last time. 2-1. 2 is guilty of serious foul play. Cameroon's Rigobert Banyanyong Song prevented a breakaway from Brazil's Bebeto, a play both serious and foul and deserving of a red card. 3 uses foul or abusive language. Can't show you that. And 4 is guilty of a second cautionable... Oh, I hate this! 3 uses foul or abusive language, and 4 is guilty of a second cautionable offense after having received a caution. Chalk up Bolivia's Luis Cristaldo for both on 3, 2, 1. Chalk up Bolivia's Luis Cristaldo for both on this case, as he receives a yellow card and then uses on a foul or abusive language to draw a second yellow and be ejected against South Korea. A tone was set in the first match of the tournament when Bolivia's Marco Antonio Echeverri was ejected for this illegal kick against the Germans. But the most notable red card of the tournament came when Italian goaltender Gianluca Pagliuca, the mother 3, 2, 1. But the most notable red card of the tournament came when Italian goaltender Gianluca Pagliuca was ejected against Norway for a handball outside the goal where the game was still scoreless. 3, 2, 1. But the most notable red card of the tournament came when Italian goaltender Gianluca Pagliuca was ejected against Norway for a handball outside the goal area with the game still scoreless. Down a man, a team's first instinct is defense. An injured Roberto Baggio, who is now a liability, even if he is one of the world's most talented offensive players. The gamble paid off. Italy's still alive in this year's World Cup, but the flurry of red cards thus far has taught coaches and players alike to control their play if they'd like to.
I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Rigobert Byung-Young Song. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel and Rigobert Byung-Young Song, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. It was produced by Gary Miller. No, TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend, since we're talking about Gary Miller, Kenny Mayne. Kenny Mayne, the barber shaves another customer. Everything else was, as ever, my fault. That's Countdown for today, a week until we inaugurate a constitutionally ineligible president who is mad as an effing hatter. And, on the good side, just 1,469 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck term, if he lasts that long. The next scheduled countdown is Thursday. As always, bulletins as the news warrants. Till the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and... wait, I'm going to hit the post here. Good luck.